welcome the Lore Foundation.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'll just project a little bit. It'll be a little bit easier for everybody in the back. So, hello, my name is Alan Foster. I am one of the directors of the Lore Foundation, which is a brand new foundation that was built out of an older company called LoreBooks. For those of you who are familiar with my work, I am the co-organizer of the Boston EdTech Meetup Group and CEO of Lore Media Inc., which focuses on applying VR and AR technology to basically museums, libraries, and other EdTech services. So a little bit about the Lore Foundation. There we go. Now, our mission is to apply emerging technology to solve the world's toughest humanitarian challenges in a self-sufficient and sustainable manner, which means we focus on impact investments, taking money and putting it into systems that will continue running and generating revenue to be self-sufficient. It's based on the idea that entropy is the death of legacy, that eventually everything, including organizations, break down over time unless you find a way to keep them sustainable. Now, that's one of the purposes of archives, is to basically protect our heritage and legacy of our culture. So here's an example of some of the projects I've been working on for the past 2 years, basically converting ebooks or two-dimensional literature into 3D holographic books. And we found a way to actually apply this in a manner that is self-sustainable, at least for the early adopters. Now, one of the problems that we are tackling, the first problem we're tackling, is that on average, less than 10% of any documents in your average archive have not been digitized. Now, archives are primarily used by researchers when they're doing their work. For example, if you want to go online and find something on Google, you go to Wikipedia, you see all the history associated with, the Ming Dynasty, and all of that data comes from research done by researchers who access all of that historical information from primary sources stored in archives, which means that anytime you see something online, it's coming out of an archive in some way. Now, your average archive looks like this. This is, I believe it's the National Archives in Washington, D.C. This is a little bit busier than it normally is, but you can see people travel from all over the world in order to come and access these documents because only 10% have been digitized. Those are usually the most readily used documents, but there's still a plethora of other documents that people can't get to unless they come and visit. You can actually see on the table there, you see one of the storage documents in the bottom right corner, and there are literally tens of thousands of these. There are entire warehouses dedicated to storing these documents. These are the original letters of Thomas Jefferson. Basically, anything you can imagine from history, this is our history. This is how it is stored. Now, if you want to travel to one of these archives, you're going to have to book a flight, get a hotel, and usually it'll cost you about roughly $2,500 to visit for about a week, which comes down to, I've broken it out so that you can see the hourly cost to do research in one of these archives. Now, it's usually about $90 to $45 per hour, depending on what you do, and that's if you want to travel internationally. But usually what people do is they'll hop between different archives. So they'll visit France, then they'll go to Germany, then they'll visit several different archives in their research. And that causes prices to go up exponentially. Our goal is to apply VR and AR technology to cut it down to a flat cost through the use of digital live streaming, remote visitation. Our goal is to apply some of these new headsets and their internal built-in cameras. We're specifically focusing on the Meta, so that you can live stream. This service is available already. People have been doing this for a long time. They've just never figured out a sustainable way to apply it for library and archival services. We're focusing on the ViewCam, which is a brand new headset that's coming out in about, I believe it's 3 months, it's going to be on the market. We're actively working with Expert Eye AMA, which they're based right in Cambridge, and they're very interested in working with us to apply this new technology. Not only do we cut the cost of researching in half for travel, all of that money that would have otherwise gone to the airlines and hotels is now going back into the ecosystem to support archivists and creating new jobs. So one of the problems we're facing right now is bandwidth. We actually did a demo yesterday, and the truth is you wouldn't have been able to see that much because the bandwidth associated on this network is just being killed today. So our goal ultimately is to use 4K cameras and leverage a lot of the new emerging 5G networks so that you will be able to hire a research assistant over in, say, China, as an example, who will then live stream the collections on the table right in front of you. Now, usually when you go into one of these archives, there's no food or drinks allowed, and I have heard instances of people who will literally skip meals to maximize how much time they have in these archives. One of their biggest fears is the fact that if they miss something, if they don't have enough time to go through all of the documents they need to get to, they can't go back because they have a limited budget. Usually these budgets of $2,000 to $3,000 are instituted by universities or whoever's sponsoring the work that they're doing, which means that if they screw up, there's no way to go back. The primary purpose of this service is to allow researchers to, instead of focusing on one archive for their research, is now they can pick and choose what collections they would like to access that's most appropriate to the work that they're doing, which means that now we're going to see an increase in the quality of research that's being done and the information publicly available to all of us. Let's see, and I think we'll switch over to questions. That pretty much explains it pretty well. Thank you. Yes?
So I'm just curious about the choice in live streaming versus capturing. If your goal is to digitize all the archives, are you capturing what you're streaming?
That's a great question. So one of the biggest limitations right now in archives, and the reason that more isn't available, is copyright. Is that I believe is it 28 years after death or 78? Yeah, 70 years after death, which means most things that are in archives are still under copyright, or it's unsure, which is even worse. You're unsure if it's under copyright. Because we are doing a live stream, we're not permanently storing anything. This is considered a remote visitation. It's an accessibility tool, and we've spoken with many archivists about this, and they say that you're right. This is an accessibility tool, which means we don't even need permissions from the archives to start using this, which is a good thing because that would take about a year just to go through the bureaucracy of and everything associated with that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
In that case, how do researchers cite works that they've found?
So that's a good question. One of the things, we're not filling in that entire cycle. For example, the researchers still need to know what they're trying to access. And usually that involves speaking with archivists to figure out what's in their collections. We're also looking at ways, for example, you have to pull, usually you request to pull something out of the archive from that big storage facility about 72 hours in advance. So although right now we're fitting in to remove the travel costs, and eventually we will scale in either direction to make it so that the research assistants also digitize some of the documents. Once researchers decide, yes, this is something I need, no, it's not something I need. Usually if a researcher thinks they might need something, they'll have it digitized and scanned, if that's allowed. Otherwise, about usually 80 to 90% of what they're looking at, they immediately know this isn't relevant. So, that helps to reduce costs.
Searchability certainly comes into it at some point. You might say, well, we've heard of that term at some point in many people's searches. Words themselves, adjectives, descriptive nouns, they're not copyrightable. So you might be able to boost somebody's recovery rate of information that's put into them if you were a kind of reader.
Yep, we'll be looking at metadata in the future. Otherwise, I think we're out of time. Can we take one more question, or is that pretty much it? All right, one more question.
So what happens at the library? Say, somebody's got to feed the documents and put them under a scanner or something. So it takes human effort that it wouldn't necessarily be required otherwise. Like, in other words, they would just give you the box, you would open it and look at it yourself if you were a researcher, whereas now they've got a labor cost that they didn't have.
Yep, and so we actually pay our research assistants $15 an hour, so it's basically an intro position to working with archives. So, and that's average 15. They start at 12, it goes all the way up to 20 depending on their qualifications. Even then, it's still cheaper than physically going there. All right, thank you very much.